We are the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, or ACAM for short.
Hello, welcome to the Papers podcast series for the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, or ACAM for short. I'm Hsieh, a professor at the University of York. In this series, we speak to authors of papers published in one of ACAM's 3 journals. These are the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry, commonly known as JCPP, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health, known as CAM, and JCPP Advances. Today I'm talking with Hsieh, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Psychology, Kingston University, London. Stone is the lead author of a JCPP editorial perspective called Healthy Body, Healthy Mind. Does exercise benefit people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? This editorial will be the focus of today's podcast. If you're a fan of our Papers podcast series, please subscribe on your preferred streaming platform. Let us know how we did with a rating or review, and do share with your friends and colleagues. Stone, thank you so much for joining me. Can you start with an introduction about who you are and what you do?
First of all, thank you for having me. Very happy to be here. And I'm Stone from Kingston, and I was actually originated from Taiwan. Before I jump into my current research, I was actually trained in exercise physiology, but later I was fascinated by how our brain connection and memory works, and also fascinated by how exercise can potentially optimize or maximize our brain function and connection across the lifespan. So I kind of changed my direction during my PhD. So I switched to focus on how exercise can benefit our connection across the lifespan. And my ongoing work, so we basically use different cognitive and psychological measures or psychological tools to study how exercise can potentially modify or modulate our attention, connection, memory, brain function using different tools and neuroimaging measurements during the development, especially for neurodivergent children, such as children with ADHD and autism.
And I can see from your publications that you've published lots on exercise and cognitive function, and you've talked about just then where you became interested in this during your PhD, but why specifically this line of research?
I think what drives me or motivates me the most is that we know that exercise is beneficial for our brain and connection. However, what we don't know is what types of exercise, what modality of exercise, and what about the frequency, duration of exercise. And we also know that one exercise cannot fit for everyone. So I think what driven me in the, say, past 10 years is that I want to know how different exercise types or modalities or choices are most effective or beneficial for different populations. I think another area that I have a strong interest in is that I also want to know what exercise is beneficial. So that's why I mentioned that in my research, I routinely incorporate different measurements, psychological, cognitive, and neuroimaging tools. My overarching goal is that I want to know the best exercise options for different people, for everyone, and for different occasions, different needs.
Fascinating. So let's turn to the editorial. Can you give us an overview, just a brief overview of the editorial itself?
So I think the editorial article mostly surrounds the topic of exercise and ADHD. Also, another focus is that I also discuss as a researcher how we can move the research area further. So I think at the beginning, I briefly summarize how exercise may affect deficits in connection in young people with ADHD. And then secondly, I offer some recommendations based on the literature on experiences and emphasize that we need more research and focus on the brain mechanisms, or we call neural markers that may drive the effects of exercise on ADHD. And also important is that we should try to see whether or not changes in these brain mechanisms are intercorrelated with changes in ADHD symptoms. Because I think at the end of the day, we need to know the brain mechanisms, what drive the effects of exercise, so that we can better tailor our exercise program or our exercise intervention. Another emphasis of the article is that we should start just thinking about user perspective or user experience when we conceptualize or when we develop our exercise intervention. Because at the end of the day, we want to promote and deliver our program of intervention to the user, which should be the children and the parents. So it's vital for researchers to start thinking about the perspective and feedback from our end user, children and parents when we develop our intervention. And also, it would be vital to incorporate social support elements, such as support from parents, support from peers, as part of the intervention program. Lastly, I also emphasize the need to study the standalone effect of exercise as compared to our clinical or usual treatments. Because if we want to increase or enhance the clinical significance of exercise as a treatment plan or treatment option for ADHD, we need this type of research to compare the effects of exercise versus clinical treatments or medications to increase the clinical significance. This needs to be done by more high quality and well-designed clinical trials for sure.
Okay, excellent. And let's unpack that a bit more. So the first part of the editorial is about the treatments. So what are some of the current treatments for ADHD and what are their limitations?
I think for now, the most common treatment plans for ADHD, the first is psychostimulant medication. The other one is behavior treatment. But either one has its own limitation and shortages. For instance, for medication, we know that firstly, the effects of medication is short-lived. So many of the medication, the effects only sustain for 4 to 6 hours or 12 hours. Another thing to note is that many of these medications has side effects. We're collecting data for a project right now. Based on our own data, we learned that more than 50% of children who are taking ADHD medications are also experiencing the side effects from medication. And this could be trouble sleeping, bad appetite, and headache during the day, just to name a few. So that's why many parents, they are actually looking for some other, say, alternative behavioral treatments. Another type of treatment is behavior treatment, such as cognitive behavioral therapy or parental education sessions or psychosocial therapy. However, because this type of behavioral treatments, they are also effective, but these treatments has to be delivered by specialized psychiatrists. So I think this kind of further compromise the accessibility of the treatment. Right now, we know that despite medication and behavioral treatments are effective, but there are also many limitations. So this kind of motivate and justify many researchers, including myself, to looking for non-clinical behavioral treatments or interventions such as exercise.
Okay, now let's turn to exercise. What are the key findings from your own research and others on the impact of exercise on ADHD symptoms?
For now, the majority of research has shown that exercise can reduce dysfunctions in executive function. So executive function is a higher order condition that involves in our goal-oriented behaviors. So that means basically your day-to-day behaviors are directed or dictated by executive functions. And research has shown that ADHD children have worse performance in executive function compared to their neurotypical peers. So based on the current state of the research, we know that exercise has quite strong effect on executive function. So in other words, for children with ADHD, exercise have the potential to reduce the dysfunction or impairments in their executive function. And also, some research demonstrated that even a single dose of exercise at a moderate intensity can actually reduce dysfunction in children with ADHD. But the effect is not very long, just a couple of hours after exercise. So this is for executive function. For symptoms of ADHD, I think for now, the body of literature is less limited. Different studies utilize different measurements for ADHD symptoms or behavioral symptoms. But I think for now, the consensus is that exercise can reduce inattention symptoms, but has less positive effects on symptoms such as hyperactivities and impulsivity. This is actually quite interesting because this further drive us or motivate us to further looking at what make the differences between inattention and hyperactivities in terms of the selective effects of exercise.
Okay, so just to make sure that I've understood that right. So what you're saying is there's evidence to suggest that in children with ADHD, exercise to some extent helps to reduce the cognitive deficits that might be associated with ADHD, such as executive function, but not necessarily the behavioral aspects of ADHD, such as hyperactivity.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and I think one of the interesting things there is like some of the work that we've been doing in the general population, we're finding that when we look at inattention and hyperactivity and see how it clusters with some cognitive functioning in the general population, it seems that inattention is more closely related to cognitive function rather than hyperactivity. So could that be maybe why the effects are shown for cognitive function and inattention, but not necessarily hyperactivity, because cognitive function and inattention are more closely related conceptually?
Personally, I think this might be the reason because we know that executive function is highly correlated with attention, arousal, and some higher order connection, but most of them focus on attention. And I think this is where executive function plays the most vital role. But when it comes to hyperactivities or impulsivity, I think there are more brain mechanisms underlie hyperactivities or impulsivity. So for instance, yeah, we know that there are other brain mechanisms such as motivation, reward seeking, delay aversion. All these might be the factors affecting hyperactivities and impulsivities. And yeah, so this might be the reason that exercise shows less promising effects on hyperactivities and impulsivity because based on the current state of the literature, I think the exercise intervention we have right now is not that effective for cognitive domains such as motivation, sensation seeking, and motivation. To solve this question or this limitation, we certainly need more research focusing on these other types of cognitive aspects.
And when you were describing exercise, you mentioned moderate exercise. Can you just unpack a bit more about what the types of exercise are? Like in the research with children with ADHD, what does moderate mean? And does it make a difference whether it's group exercise, individual exercise, intensity, and all those kinds of things?
When we talk about moderate to vigorous exercise, we're actually talking about the intensity where you can chat and talk to your friends while you are exercising. If you start to feel like you are short of breath and you are feel exhausted, this is vigorous exercise. So in terms of brain function, connection, and attention, the most robust effects comes from moderate to vigorous intensity exercise. This is not just only for neurodivergent children. This is also for neurotypical children. This also applies to adults and the elderly. Right now, we know that aerobic-based exercise is most beneficial because aerobic exercise can directly lead to structural and functional changes in our brain, such as prefrontal cortex, such as hippocampus, and also can trigger greater connection between different cortical areas. So all these are beneficial for our connection. But in more recent years, scientists start to also promote exercise that can challenge our connection and fitness at the same time. So this could be football or tennis. As long as the exercise itself is capable to challenge our multitasking, attention, inhibition, decision making, all these exercises are highly recommended, especially for children.
Thank you. And let's move on to the mechanisms of action. So, what are some of the mechanisms through which exercise might benefit young people with ADHD?
From animal studies, right now we know that exercise can induce higher secretion of key neurotransmitters in our brain, especially in our prefrontal cortex, which is a cortical region for decision making, attention, higher order connections. And when it comes to what neurotransmitters, right now I think it is quite robust to say that exercise can trigger more secretion of dopamine and norepinephrine. And this actually similar to the effects of medication. From research, we also know that psychostimulant medication can also trigger increased secretion of dopamine and norepinephrine. So I believe this is why scientists start to thinking about, okay, maybe we can use exercise as a complementary treatment for ADHD because exercise may have similar cortical effects as medications. When it comes to mechanisms, there are many different angles or perspectives. So if we use, say, neuroimaging as measurements, such as EEG, we know that exercise can lead to better attention engagement. That means children can better recruit their neural resources when they need to pay attention. And also, we know that from EEG, children can better inhibit their impulsive or autonomic behaviors. From functional MRI or more advanced neuroimaging tools, we know that after a single dose of exercise, the connectivity between, say, the prefrontal cortex and other brain regions, such as ACC, parietal cortex, are becoming stronger, which is beneficial for attention, impulsivity, and other cognitive aspects, such as cognitive flexibility.
So what you're saying is the mechanisms through which exercise and medications work on ADHD symptoms and the associated cognitive deficits are similar, and similar neurotransmitters are released in similar parts of the brain. But is it to the same extent, or is one effect stronger than the other?
Actually, a very big question. I think for now, it is hard to say whether or not exercise can benefit our brain as effective as medication, because there's not much evidence out there that directly compare exercise versus medication. So when it comes to extent or level of, or the magnitude of effect, it's hard to say. However, I think what is more important is that, as I mentioned, the effects of medication is not sustainable. Usually the effects disappear in a couple of hours. However, because exercise can lead to structural changes in our brain, which cannot be achieved by medication. So if we talk about, say, transient or short-term effects, it is hard to say. But if we're thinking about the long-term adaptation induced by exercise versus medication, I think exercise would be a better option in terms of long-term structural changes.
Okay, and then when we're thinking about implementation in real-world settings, what are the main challenges in translating exercise-based interventions from controlled research environments, and for example, you talked about animal studies, to the real world?
For now, laboratory-based study, we can only know the efficacy of exercise because the environment is under control. In the laboratory study, we always have pre-visit instructions. We try to maximize the internal validity of our research and try to minimize any potential confounding factors. But I think for now, when it comes to effectiveness, acceptability, or feasibility in the real world, we didn't know much about this. But I think it would be important to note that young people with ADHD, they tend to have, say, lower self-esteem. Many of them have troubles in their relationships with their friends, their peers, their classmates. And many of them also have inferior motor skills, such as hand-eye coordination, balance, etc., etc. All this may prevent them from participating in exercise, especially on a regular basis, because for them, it is very difficult to gradually build up their self-efficacy, to build up a positive exercise environment for them. Or some of them might be able to participate, but many of them will not be able to participate at the level we want them to achieve. There's always a gap between what we have found in the lab and what we can actually deliver in the real world settings. I will recommend that we start from individualized exercise because different young people may have different needs, different preferences. And I think at least at the very beginning, it will be important for them to gradually develop their self-efficacy, their self-esteem, their confidence in performing different type of exercise.
Thank you. And I suppose my next question was going to be on customizing interventions, but I think you've covered that quite well, because I think, like you say, young people with ADHD might have peer problems or friendship difficulties. I think some researchers support that. So customizing these interventions, exercise-based interventions for people with ADHD is probably very important here. What kinds of factors might need to be considered during that customization process?
I think there are a couple of key factors, such as the type of exercise they prefer, the ideal duration per exercise bout they prefer, and the frequency of session per week. For instance, if you look at the literature, many papers will tell you that the most effective frequency for an exercise intervention is 3 to 5 times per week. If you actually ask children and parents whether or not you think you can participate in an exercise intervention for 5 times a week, many of them will tell you that it might be a bit difficult. And if you continue to ask them, what is your preferred frequency of exercise per week? They will tell you 3 times a week is their preferred frequency. Also, other factors to consider, what resources they need. Some parents, they might be having difficulties to encourage their children, because for children to keep participating in exercise, many of them also require company from their parents. So many parents are struggling to find a way or solution or effective way to support their children to perform the exercise with their children. So some parents will specifically ask for resources that can guide them to support their children to perform the exercise. And also there are factors such as what are the motivators and barriers that may increase or prevent children and parents from participating in their intervention. All these are the key factors or elements that we need to consider.
And I imagine there'll be many parents out there and many listeners who would see this as an appealing intervention for ADHD. But before we can get to a point of this being a reasonable and valid and effective intervention, I imagine there are still lots of critical gaps in the current research on the relationship between exercise and ADHD that need to be addressed. What are those gaps and how strong is the evidence base for this?
As I mentioned in the editorial, I think there are a couple of gaps. I think the first gap is the mechanism. What are the brain mechanisms that may drive or explain the effects of exercise? Because right now we only know that exercise benefits executive function. But for other brain mechanisms that may also underlie ADHD, such as motivation, delay aversion, we don't have much evidence on this. So I think it will be vital to further clarify the brain mechanisms, because by better understanding the brain mechanisms, we can better tailor and develop our exercise intervention to optimize the effects. The second gap would be to consider user perspective. So what I would suggest is that we can see exercise as a product, and our users are parents and children. Our goal is to promote and to make sure that our product can be successfully delivered and promoted. We definitely need to know the feedback from children and parents. So that's why I emphasize a few times that when we develop exercise intervention, we need to consider user perspective. There are other gaps, which is quite interesting to me, is that there's not much evidence out there, but I think it would be interesting to explore how different subtypes of ADHD may affect the efficacy of exercise. We need to better understand the moderating role of the subtypes of ADHD. By better understanding this, we can offer or provide more precise exercise recommendation for different populations. Another gap I want to emphasize is that to test the standalone effect of exercise versus medication. If our final goal is to say that exercise is indeed a behavioral and complementary treatment plan for ADHD.
Thank you. And are there any upcoming studies or initiatives that you're working on that you'd like to share with us?
For now, we are about to start an EEG study where we're trying to look at different brain markers that may underlie ADHD symptoms or capture ADHD symptoms. We will be using different neuroimaging tools to better understand the relationship between different cortical or brain markers and ADHD symptoms. We are also preparing an interventional study where we want to deliver 8 weeks of exercise-based video games to children and parents in the lab. And we want to see if our intervention can actually change impulsivity and hyperactivities and attention, of course, in school-age children with ADHD. And also a third initiative we are working on is currently we are also inviting children with ADHD and parents to join us at Kingston to play and co-develop a PE, a physical education lesson with us. So it is like a participatory research and co-design research.
They sound very interesting. Very much looking forward to seeing the results of those. And then finally, what's your take-home message for our listeners?
I think this is not just for neurodivergent children and families. I think this applies to everyone. So I think the key things is that there's no perfect exercise or one exercise that fits for all. So I think in terms of improving our health and improving our attention, connection, brain function, I think it will be vital to find an exercise that we love and can commit to consistently and stay with the exercise plan and try to make sure that your plan can become regular behavior and then just experience the benefits of exercise.
Thank you so much. Fantastic and fascinating conversation. For more details on the paper and Stone, please visit the ACAM website, www.acam.org, and Twitter @ACAM. ACAM is spelled ACAMH. And don't forget to follow us on your preferred streaming platform. Let us know if you enjoyed the podcast with a rating or review, and do share with your friends and colleagues.